The night the words were spoken, they didn't sound like desire. They sounded like a challenge, a declaration, a weapon thrown across a dusty room thick with judgment and fear. The saloon had gone quiet, not because people respected silence, but because they recognized the sound of a rule snapping in half. She stood there, mud on her boots, fire in her eyes, having spent her whole life believing men made the rules, and women survived them. Yet here she was, staring down the rancher every man in the county feared, saying something no woman was ever supposed to say out loud. Not to him. Not to anyone. The rancher didn't move. That was what unsettled everyone. He had broken men for less, buried reputations without lifting a finger. He was built like the land itself, scarred, dry, unyielding, but his eyes weren't cruel. They were tired, observant, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't anger that came out, but something worse, restraint. He told her she didn't understand what she was inviting, not because he wanted her to fear him, but because the world would never forgive either of them. She had grown up learning that men took, women endured, and silence was survival. But this rancher didn't take. He waited, and that wait unraveled everything she thought she knew. He didn't shame her, didn't threaten her, didn't touch her. He simply told her she was free to leave, and that freedom hit her harder than any slap ever could, because freedom meant responsibility, choice, consequence. As they spoke, the tension between them wasn't physical, it was ideological. She accused him of hiding, behind honor, while benefiting, from a system built on quiet suffering. He accused her of mistaking rebellion for control, every word cut deeper than a blade. The town watched, unsure who to fear more, the man who wouldn't dominate, or the woman who refused to submit. By the end of the night, nothing had happened, and everything had changed. She walked out shaking, not from rejection, but from realization. The rancher stayed behind. Knowing the rule he broke wasn't moral, it was expected cruelty. And the moment he refused to play that role, he became more dangerous than any outlaw. Days passed. But the town couldn't forget. Neither could she. The words she had thrown at him echoed in her mind, not as embarrassment, but as a mirror. She returned to the ranch not for him, but for herself. What she found wasn't a man waiting to claim something, but a man prepared to walk away, and that somehow made staying feel like rebellion all over again. They spoke at sunrise, not in heat but in honesty. He told her his past, how he had once believed strength meant conquest, until it cost him everything worth keeping. She told him about the rules she had lived under, the quiet bargains, the fear disguised as normal. Between them, something fragile formed, not lust, but trust, the most dangerous thing in a lawless land. When intimacy finally came, it was off-screen, unspoken, respectful because the real story wasn't bodies colliding, but walls falling. The rule he broke wasn't chastity, it was entitlement. He didn't take her power, he recognized it. And in a world built on domination, that recognition was revolutionary. The town would never see it that way. Rumors spread, judgment followed. But something else spread too. Possibility. Women began to speak louder. Men began to listen or lose ground. And the rancher once feared became something rarer, a man who changed the rules by refusing to enforce them. She didn't belong to him. He never belonged to her. What they shared was choice, freely given, fiercely protected. And that was the kind of story the West was never ready for, but desperately needed. The West had never been kind to people who rewrote its rules. It tolerated violence, cruelty, and silence. But it punished change with a precision sharper than any blade. By the third week, the town had decided that what happened between the rancher and the woman was no longer a private matter. It became a warning story, passed in whispers, twisted by fear and jealousy, sharpened by men who had lost control and women who had never been offered choice. The narrative was no longer about what they had done. It was about what they represented. The rancher felt it first in the way prices changed. Hands hesitated, eyes lingered too long. Deals he'd sealed with a handshake suddenly required witnesses. Fences were cut at night. Water rights were challenged. None of it was accidental. The town wasn't attacking his land. It was testing his resolve. They wanted him to revert, to remind everyone who he used to be. Because if a man like him could change, Then the entire order of things became unstable. She felt it differently. For her, the punishment came in isolation. Women who once confided in her turned away. Mothers pulled their daughters closer when she passed. She was no longer pitied, she was feared. Not because she had sinned, but because she had spoken, because she had chosen. And in a world where survival depended on obedience, choice looked like contagion. They met less often, not out of distance, but strategy. When they did, words mattered more than touch ever could. They spoke about consequences, about whether change was worth the cost, about how easy it would be to retreat into the roles written for them. He told her he would endure whatever came, but he would not undo what he had learned. She told him she was tired of surviving quietly. The chapter ends with the town making its move, not with guns but with law. A formal accusation, a public hearing, a chance to humiliate, control, and reassert dominance. And for the first time, both of them understood. This was no longer about them. It was about whether the West would allow a different future. The hearing wasn't held in a courtroom. It was held in the open under the sun, where judgment felt biblical and mercy was rare. The accusations were vague by design. Improper conduct, disruption of moral order, encouraging rebellion. The words were empty, but the intent was clear. Strip them of legitimacy, reduce them to symbols of danger, and remind everyone watching that power still belonged to the many, not the brave. Witnesses spoke. Some lied. Some twisted truth until it was unrecognizable. A few told the truth but were shouted down. The rancher listened without interruption. When it was his turn, he didn't defend his reputation. He challenged the premise. He asked who benefited from rules that required silence. He asked why respect was confused with fear. He asked why consent terrified the powerful more than violence ever had. Then she stood. The crowd hadn't expected that. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She told them exactly who she had been before. Obedient, invisible, careful, and how none of it had kept her safe. She told them that nothing had been taken from her and everything had been returned. Not by force, by choice. Her voice didn't shake when she said the line that ended the hearing. If your rules only work when women are silent, then your rules are already broken. The verdict was never officially spoken. It didn't need to be. The town had lost control of the story. Some walked away angry. Others thoughtful. A few inspired. Change doesn't announce victory, it leaves cracks. That night, as the fires burned low and the West pretended nothing had changed, something irreversible had already happened. The West didn't collapse. It adapted, slowly, unevenly, painfully, but it adapted. Months later, the ranch still stood, scarred but standing. The town still whispered, but it also listened. Not all men changed. Not all women felt safe. But the idea, the dangerous, unstoppable idea, that choice could exist without chaos had taken root. The rancher was no longer feared the same way. He was respected by some, avoided by others, and watched by many. She had become something rarer than accepted. She had become undeniable. Girls watched her walk with her head high. Women asked questions they had never asked before. Men were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that power did not vanish when shared. Their relationship was never claimed, never owned, never paraded. It existed on its own terms. And that, more than anything, was the final rule that survived everything. No one owed the world an explanation for choosing themselves. The story ends not with a kiss or a gunshot or a conquest, but with a quiet morning, open land, and a future no longer written by fear. And sometimes, that's the most revolutionary ending of all. You believe stories like this matter, stories about strength, consent, and breaking the rules that hurt us. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay with us, because the next story will challenge everything you think you know about power in the Wild West.